Hey friends, welcome to Canadian Cutting Edge University. I'm Professor Jake. You can tell that I'm smart because I got gray hair, glasses, and a collar. I don't take myself seriously, but I do want to share with you what is a sharpener's choil today, why do they exist, how do they work, the 5 W's, and let's just get to the tabletop and get into this. There's a lot of knives that have sharpening choils, but certainly not all of them have them. Here's a knife that doesn't have it. It could have one though. There's some knives that could not have a sharpener's choil. A prime example is a chef's knife. So on a knife like this, even if you wanted to put a sharpener's choil, you couldn't. There's no place available to put one. So we're not going to talk about knives that have this kind of design. That would be a totally different subject. Of course, you can ask any questions that you want down below in the comment section. And to make it easy for you guys, I'm going to put my my notes that I'm using to prepare this video. I'm going to make them available on a public Google share, and the link for that will be down below in the description section so that you can go there and find it. And maybe you want a paper version that you want to peruse at some point instead of always going back to a video. Make that easy for you. Also in the description section, you're going to find a whole bunch of links to different stores where you can buy stuff, discount codes, and referral links for Amazon. A lot of different opportunities for you to help me out for helping you guys out. Now, as you can tell from the intro, I don't take myself too seriously, but I do like to be clear and concise. Well, I'm not all that concise, am I? I like to go on rabbit trails and stuff. If you want to watch a video where everything is very straight to the point and just details and done, this is not your video. If you're willing to, listen to a guy sometimes ramble, but convey some good stuff, this video is probably for you. This is going to be a fairly comprehensive examination of the subject of what sharpener's choils are, why they exist, all that stuff that I mentioned in the intro. This video will not cover the subject of forward choils. That is, on a knife like this that has a huge section here that's designed to put your finger there. If you want a video on forward choils, let me know in the comments down below. Before we get into all the details, we need to start off by some terms. Terminology is important because if we're not using the words the same way, we might not understand what's going on. Because in every language, there's often lots of words for different things. And then there's culture. There's a lot of cultures that speak English, and they might call different parts of the knife a different thing. So I'm going to tell you what I'm calling the different parts of the knife. I've got a close-up image of this section of this knife. This knife has got a ricasso, which most knives have. This is a flat section of steel. If you look at the spine of the blade, you see how thick that blade is. That flat section of steel, that's next to the handle and before the main part of the knife. So with my hand, I'm covering the main part of the knife. Now I'm covering the handle. This flat section between, that's the ricasso. Everything from swords to little knives usually have a ricasso. Not always, but usually. So that's that section there. So I'm not going to talk anything about the handle in this video. Ricasso, and this section of the blade here is the bevel, or the main bevel sometimes, but generally I'll just say bevel. That is the part of the steel that's been ground away to get from the full thickness of the ricasso and sometimes the spine of the blade, the full thickness down to the cutting edge. That transition spot where it's going from wide to thin is called the bevel. This section here that you cut with, of course, that's the edge. Where the edge ends, that's the heel. That would be the tip on this end over here, but over here, important for our use, that's the heel. And then this hole here, that piece of steel that's been cut away where my finger is sticking in right now, that's the sharpener's choil. This is a fairly big sharpener's choil, but I'm using it so that it makes our illustration for right now, the terms, a whole lot easier to pinpoint. So this section here can be big, it can be tiny, and everything in between. So we've got the heel, we've got the ricasso, we've got the bevel. The only thing that we need to talk about now is the plunge. Now, the plunge is an important thing because you can do that any way you want. What the plunge is where the ricasso turns into the bevel, that transition zone in between. It can be gradual, like this one's very gradual. It goes from this line that you can clearly see right here on the edge of the ricasso and down to here. As you've already seen in that picture, that section is highlighted in yellow. A knife can have a very slow plunge. It can have a very abrupt plunge, and we're going to see knives of a variety of different styles. So that's the names of the parts. The next question is, why do they exist? Some folks don't like sharpener's choils. If you go on the internet and look up sharpener's choils, why, positives, negatives about sharpener's choils, on forums, especially for knife makers, you'll find fairly polarized views. Some people say they hate sharpener's choils. Other times you might go to a hunting forum or something and you'll find a bunch of people say they hate sharpener's choils. Usually there's two main reasons why people dislike sharpener's choils. One is the aesthetic. They don't like how it looks. They prefer a knife without a sharpener's choil. Fine, perfectly legitimate reason. No problem there. The other reason that you're going to see coming up is they don't like sharpener's choils because they get caught on things. And generally, we're talking about people who are hunters doing skinning. And I totally get that. I'm not a hunter myself, but I know a little bit about hunting. And when you're cutting through something, especially if you're skinning, no, this is not a skinning knife, not even close. You're cutting through something, and then on the back draw, you can get stuff pulled into the sharpener's choil. And then your knife is stuck, and then you might end up jerking it and stuff, and you cut stuff that you don't want to cut. Worse yet, when you're in the gut cavity, you don't want to do that. So definitely there are some knives that are best without sharpener's choils. And of course, skinning knives being a really big one of those. This video is not going to attempt to try to change your mind either way. I don't think there's a right and a wrong answer for are they good or are they bad? Are they pro or are they con? We each have our own preferences on that. No problem. You can comment down below either way, but I'm not going to get into that discussion, either here or in the comments. The next thing that we want to look at, the shape of them. And this sort of relates to the things getting caught on them. The most common shape of a sharpener's choil is not on this table. Let me go get one. This is the Ganzo G72. And this right here is the most common shape for a sharpener's choil, like we saw in the introduction. It's basically a circle. Knife makers, like home knife makers, small shop knife makers, they usually use a round file. They put the blade in a clamp, and they use a round file to make a sharpener's choil. And that's why they're usually round. So you see the circle in here, and there you go. It starts at the ricasso, it ends after the plunges ended in the bevel, and it's in between there. Some of them are big, some of them are tiny. We'll discuss something about that in just a little while. There are some differences as well. This is an axis lock knife. This is by Ganzo, the G738. By the way, the G series of knives have stopped being made almost 4 years ago now. But the point is the axis locks, and you can see in here, hopefully on this one, maybe I'll get a different one here. This is one of my favorite knives, budget knives that I've had for a number of years, the G704. So it's got an axis lock. I took the handle scales off so you could see a little bit easier. And the way an axis lock works is the stop pin is used when the knife opens, but when you close the knife, there's a stop pin for the closing, and that is the axis lock pin that stops it. So when the blade is coming to close, it needs space on the tang of the blade to get there. And so I don't know if you can see it in here or not, but that light gray section there, that's the tang of the blade. And to sweep over to this point, you can see that there needs to be a lot of material removed. And so a lot of axis lock knives, let's get a focus back here. So a lot of axis lock knives don't have the sharpener's choil coming back down. It's as if, there's no flipper tab here. So that steel is just missing. Here's a really good example of it. This is the Harn's Giant Silkworm. I've not yet reviewed this, but you can see very clearly in there, this is actually a forward choil, but same kind of idea as a sharpener's choil. All that steel has to be gone so that when the knife closes, it can sit in there. So yeah, they can be really big with no back end to the sharpener's choil, just the front end down the bevel and to the heel of the blade. You can have a knife like this one. This is by Real Steel, my favorite designer, Ostap, but a number of Real Steel knives have a sharpener's choil that looks like this. If you turned it this way, and if we had a mirror copy, it would look more like an upside down heart or like a really fat raindrop or something. And the benefit of this kind of shape is it's easy for stuff to get in there and then slide right back out and not get caught. So they've thought of that idea, or at least Ostap has, of things getting caught in there. And to avoid things getting caught, he just made more room. It removes more of the edge of the blade, but there's more room in there and things can come out almost as easily as they can get in. Sometimes other knives that they're not axis locks, same kind of thing. They just have the tang of the blade, the front part of the sharpener's choil, and then it doesn't come back down, it just comes right off. There's no right or wrong shape there. So what I like to see is when knives do have something a little bit unique to address the main concern, the main criticism against sharpener's choils. Scandi grind knives actually rarely have a sharpener's choil. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't have a sharpener's choil. Here's the Finn Wolf by Cold Steel. They've got a little bit of steel removed right there, but I don't know, would you call that a sharpener's choil? Sort of. I actually don't have any of my Mora knives left, and that's because I really don't have very many knives. I have to sell them to keep the channel going. I wish I had a Mora knife to show you where it has no sharpener's choil at all. Some people will say the classic is always best. I'm of the opinion of, no, do it the way you like it. That's the best way. But that's enough of this discussion on sharpener's choils, their sizes, where they are. But we're not done yet. There's a whole lot more to learn. So this video is getting a fair bit longer than I thought it would when I got started, but we're now to the stage, what is Jake's opinion of what a good sharpener's choil looks like? For me, it all starts with the relationship of the plunge to the ricasso. That is critical. For me, I like a small ricasso and a quick plunge. First off, the ricasso. I've already told you what a ricasso is. Here's a knife with a small ricasso. It's a very thin line, less than 1/8 of an inch. Here's another knife with a small ricasso. I haven't reviewed this Civivi yet. Here's a nice Sanren Mew with a very small ricasso. My favorite budget knife from 2020. This has got the biggest ricasso of these four. But you can see it's less than 1/8 of an inch, 3 millimeters or so wide. So what benefit do you get from a small ricasso and a quick plunge? The big benefit that I like is the cutting edge is closer to your hand, closer to your fingers. It's not a big space between where your index finger is and where the cutting edge is. It's just easier to cut well when your cutting edge is closer to your hand. Is that an absolute statement? Of course not. Just in general terms, it's easier to cut well when your thumb is over the cutting edge if you have to cut forcefully. But even if you're doing more delicate stuff, that's why I really like the Outdoorsman's knife, the Mora Eldris. Unfortunately, I don't have one right now because I've had to sell most of my knives. But the great benefit of that is it's a little knife. We generally use the tip of our knives a lot, and we use the first inch, inch and a half a lot. And the Mora Eldris is all that in one without any of the extra. Of course, there's times when you need a big knife. I'm not saying that that's wrong at all. Big knives are awesome. It's just that I'm saying most of the cutting that we do can easily be done with a small knife. So why waste a bunch of that space with a big ricasso and or a plunge that takes a long time? So I like, well, here, let's move these out of the way and grab a couple of different ones. Here's another knife. This is the Mass Drop, now called Drop Perpetua. You can see the plunge right there. It goes from the thickness of the ricasso to the bevel here very quickly. It's got a curved radius, which is great. Most knives have it that way. Some knives have a step. Let's see, do I have one handy right here? Nope. Most of them, it's like this FH921 by Ganzo. It's usually a curved step down. And that's great. There's some knives that take that curve and make it really slow, really stretch out. One of the little knives that has that, it's got a good size ricasso, but it's got a long sweep, is the Malaya. Let me grab mine and show you. So I'm not saying this is a bad design. I'm just saying I prefer different. It's got a fairly small ricasso, but the plunge starts here and it goes very slowly till it gets down to the base bevel. Very often on knives that have a very slow plunge, you're going to see this. That long, slow, round curve right here. Most other knives, you've got a corner. And, see, corner right there. This one's got sort of a radius, but it's quite quick. Full flat grinds, of course, it goes right up the top, but even sometimes on full flat grinds, they sweep over, but see how short that plunge is? It's a very quick little plunge so that you get to the bevel right away, close to the hand. Some knives, you can't even see the transition there. The ricasso, this here is the griptilian. If you take the knife apart, you can see it, but they put it all underneath the handle so that you get to the cutting edge very quickly. I like that an awful lot. So some of the things that I look for is close to the ricasso, quick plunge. See, you can have hollow grinds do it. You can have saber grinds. You can have, short saber grinds. You can have all kinds of different grinds, just as long as this plunge is not really long and slow. Do I always want a knife like this? Of course not. It's just my main preference. I like this little guy too. I've got a lot of knives that are sort of like this that I like. So that's that part. There are four main types of plunges, that transition between the ricasso and the bevel. The first one I just call the step. It's easy to recognize because you have the ricasso and you have the bevel, and it's just a step down. It's not always a perfect step straight down, but yeah, it's basically very, very close to straight down. Not very many knives have this. The Interior Rat 1 and 2 are very common for having that. And I'll talk about the pros and cons of that in just a minute. So that's the first type, the step. The second one is this one. I call this one the steep slide. Imagine yourself sitting on the ricasso and you're going to slide down. You're at a park when you're a kid. It goes whee, and you're at the end real quick because it's a steep slide. And there's an abrupt change at the top, of course, where the slide starts. There's an abrupt change where the slide ends. And that's why you can see that line. You can see the line where the plunge becomes the bevel. You can see the line where it starts, of course, but the ending one is what's important. The third one is what I call the plunging slide. The plunging slide, you can of course see where it starts at the ricasso, but you can't see exactly where it turns into the bevel. Sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't. Usually the first part of it is a little more distinct, but the last part here, it's hard to draw where that line is. So it swoops kind of. It's a smoother transition. The end of the slide is not so abrupt. And the fourth type is this one, and I call this the swooping slide. Not the whooping cough, the swooping slide. It's just like the one before it, except for it's wider. From the start to the end, takes up more linear real estate of your blade. And again, you can't see where it ends. Sometimes if the light's just right, you can sort of see it. Let's turn it over here because I drew with my pen. You can see the red ink there. That's where it ends. But yeah, you can't always see that when you're looking at it. So of these types, of these 4 different types, focus down here again. Come on, focus. Of these 4 types, I really don't like the first one. And the reason is when you're sharpening it, it's easy to make a mess right here. Your sharpening stones will get into the plunge. And I'm generally thinking about the way I sharpen. I sharpen with a guided sharpening system, not with whetstones by hand. I use clamps, they clamp on the knife, and then our stone slides across the edge. Very easy to make a mess of it here. I've got a little bit of a mistake that you can see right there. You can see it, and I'll show a close-up of it. It's easy to make it look like a mess. Even if there is a sharpener's choil, you can make a mess, but definitely if there is no sharpener's choil, it's easy to make a mess of that. This one I don't like so much for the reason I've mentioned a number of times. It's a waste of that space. I'd like the cutting edge to be closer to the hand. This knife breaks both rules. Big ricasso, big swoop, so the cutting edge is further away from the hand. So these 2 are the ones I like. This one is by far the most common. Probably about 85% of knives in the market today have this kind of plunge. Bigger ricasso usually, but that kind of plunge. And then occasionally you're going to see these ones where you have that sort of angle. It's much more angular, and you can distinctly see that line. So those are the 4 types of transition plunges, which ones I like and which ones I don't like. So there you go. That's what I look for in a knife. When you've got those things, then you can make a good sharpener's choil. Without those things, I don't think you can really make a good sharpener's choil. So like this knife, it's got all those things, and so it's got a nice round sharpener's choil, which works. You could sharpen this knife, I don't know, 30, 40 times before it's gotten so small this way that the sharpener's choil runs out. We're getting close to the end now. Stay tuned. We're just about coming to the last point. And this brings us to the final section. I hope you're still with me, because this is maybe the most critical part, even though it's largely summary, where I bring it all together. Some knives don't have sharpener's choils. What really is the purpose of a sharpener's choil? Well, it's right there in the name. It's for the sharpener and doing the sharpening. It's to help them to sharpen the knife in such a way that the edge looks good and functions well. Some knives, don't have sharpener's choils. Like I showed you that Ontario ratchet a little while ago. Here's one of my Other favorite very low-cost knives, you can still find this guy, EL01 by Enlan, no sharpener's choil. What's going to happen when I sharpen this knife? It's been sharpened twice now, once at the factory and once by me. And you have this bit of steel where my fingernail is, and then it takes a step up towards the spine of the blade for the edge. If I sharpen this thing, 10, 20 times, what's this section going to look like? Things are going to get caught in there, aren't they? Even though there isn't a sharpener's choil, there's going to be a spot there where you've got a corner where stuff can get caught in. So even without a sharpener's choil, the main criticism of sharpener's choils, really, in my opinion, is a false criticism. You can get problems simply because knives are not sharpened once and then that's the way they are for the rest of their life. It's something that people that are new to the knife hobby often don't really catch. Knives are intended to last for a long time, to be able to be sharpened many times so that you can use them for years and years and years. It's not a one and done thing. It's not disposable like a razor. Not the old school straight razor, but modern disposable razors. Knives are not like that. And so if your choil is too small or the wrong shape, this works really nice right now on this knife. This is the Worker by QSP. And what you have is a little sharpener's choil. It's in the right spot, but it's so small that it's just going to take a very little bit of sharpening on this knife before it's going to become a mess in that area because that sharpener's choil is way too small. Same here on this Gavale by QSP. It's good. It's a one and done thing. This has still got the factory edge on it. And, as soon as it gets sharpened the first time, I am sure that it's going to get into that plunge. You're going to see that, typical mark that goes up into the plunge from the sharpening. And, it becomes a mess. So it needs a bigger sharpener's choil. It needs a bigger sharpener's choil. What does a good one look like? Well, here's a Tucson knife. So this knife is a really good example of a sharpener's choil that's done right. The steel can be sharpened on this edge many, many, many times. And even though it starts coming to this rounded section of the sharpener's choil, it has to come right to where my fingernail is right now before it's into the plunge. So not right there, but right up there. It can be sharpened a lot of times before it gets into the plunge. Something like this, not so much. It's going to create a dead corner in there after it's been sharpened a few times. Now, of course, the other thing is it's going to get thicker behind the grind as well, but that's another subject. The other thing that you might have figured out just on this last little bit is when you sharpen knives, try to remove as little steel as possible so that your knife, your sharpener's choil will last longer and, just in general, your knife will last longer. So there you go. I'm sure some of you have questions, comments, other things that you want to say about sharpener's choils, what your opinions are. I'm not saying that my opinions and my statements are the definitive correct things about sharpener's choils. It's just my opinion. I think some of the things I'm saying are definitely right, but some of the things I'm saying are clearly just my opinion. So take everything that you've heard with a grain of salt, get your own experience into the mix, and learn more about the subject, and keep growing as a knife enthusiast. And keep enjoying the knives that you have. Thank you, everyone, for liking this video, sharing it with somebody, commenting, subscribing. Hit that bell so you'll be notified of different videos. And remember, cut towards your chum, not your thumb. Bye for now. stuff for lunch, or should we each just make our own or what?